The mountain man expected disgrace rather than beauty that would warm his heart as he removed the sack from his bride's head. Sharp and dry, the wind howled down from the Montana peaks, bringing with it ice flecks that sliced through Maralon's tattered cloak. Her hands were tightly gripped in front of her as she waited in the muddy yard outside Silas Dobbins' trading station, surrounded by a queue of women. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke, damp wool, and horses. Each of the women present had been brought with the intention of being either chosen or sold. This was not Mara's fate. After her uncle, she had been transferred here. She signed her name to the mail-order registration since she was fed up with a girl who had neither charm nor dowry. Her picture has been turned down multiple times. Following several months of stillness, Silas Dobbins sent her a brief letter. "A man is prepared to take you. Hurry up before he decides otherwise." She arrived with her head bent, face veiled and heart shaking behind a tough Hessian bag that kept the sham in and the outside world out. Men bargained over tobacco, flour, and bullets inside the trading station as boots scuffed the wood floor and voices whispered. One deep, quiet, and thoughtful voice soared above the others. Ren Elias. That morning, the mountain man had ridden down from his cabin high in the trees. His snow-covered coat still clinging to his hat brim, his eyes had the ability to see through everything, even distance, stillness, and pretense, and his beard was studded with frost. He had no intention of stopping at the auction. He would come for lamp oil and salt, and sometimes some sugar for his small property. However, after he entered, I noticed Silas Dobbins grinning from behind. The counter, pointing to a row of women shuddering, something in his chest tightened. "Another batch from the east," Silas said, drawled. "Women who believed they would discover gold or romance. These days, all they want is a roof." Elias remained silent. He glanced over the women. The most of them looked, but one didn't. One was standing beside her, her face and hands clenched in front of her, concealed beneath her by a rough bag that was fastened. Chin. "She ain't for show, that one." When Silas noticed Elias watching, he snorted. "That kind of face makes a man sprint for you're not interested in her." Elias's, the forehead furrowed. "Then why is she here?" "She was sent by family. Claim that she consumes more food than she needs." After chuckling, Silas leaned forward. "But they claim she can work. Strong back, calm personality. Good work for a man who doesn't give a shit." Mara remained motionless as the words struck her like a slap. Elias spoke in a hushed tone. "What would happen if she wasn't chosen?" Silas gave a shrug. "After that, she is either transported back east or assigned to the kitchens. It's not my problem either way." There was a pause. Outside, the fire crackled. The wind sent forth a cry. Then quietly, Elias asked, "How much?" Silas blinked. "You're serious?" A tiny leather purse was left on the counter by Elias. Coins of silver clattered. "That'll do." Mara hardly realized what was going on until Silas seized her arm and pushed her in front of him. "My dear, take your hubby. You were just purchased." Her knees went wobbly. Her throat felt dry as she attempted to speak. Elias moved in closer, stroking her with his cloak. He was startlingly warm in comparison to the cold. Then he inquired, "Can you ride?" Once under the sack, she gave a nod. "Then we'll go," was all he said. Storms rolling in. For hours they rode in silence. The world became still and white as the snow grew thicker and the sky became wounded with evening. Because she was catching the rain, Mara's fingertips hurt. She followed a stranger who debought her without ever seeing her face. But she had no idea where they were headed or why she was abandoning everything she knew behind. Finally, Elitas slowed his horse next to a little, partially frozen river that meandered through the trees. Nearby, a tiny cabin stood with smoke billowing from its chimney. He assisted her down, dismounted, and tied the horses. His hand, which had constructed all he owned, was firm yet rough. Gently, he said, "Inside. You'll freeze out here." Then she entered the cabin, one room with a bed in the corner, a table, a cooker, and a cradle she hadn't anticipated seeing. The scent of bread and pine resin permeated the air. Under the sack, her voice was barely audible as she said, "You have a child." Elias murmured, "A boy," as he hung up his coat. "He's with Mrs. Craw in town till the weather eases. Been ill." Her chest ached from something in his tone, which was tired and protective. Then, with an enigmatic expression, he turned to face her. "If you want, you can remove the item." On the knot behind her head, her hands froze. "You waiting until morning is not what you want to do." Slowly, he shook his head. "Now you're here, I would prefer to be aware of who I'm speaking to." She stood motionless for a while, breathing shallowly and her heart racing. She untied the string after that. Like the final barrier separating her from the outside world, the Hessian slipped away and fell to the ground. Elias gave her a look. He didn't flinch, grimace, or utter a single word. He took a single breath, as if the wind had stopped, and his eyes softened. Mara's hair was the color of chestnut bark, framing her fragile yet resilient face, which was pale and freckled. Her grey-blue eyes were vibrant, tired, and apprehensive. She lowered her eyes, expecting to be laughed at or disappointed. "Rather," Elias stated gently. "You can cook," they declared. Startled, she blinked. "Yes, sir, I can." He replied, nodded, as if that were all there was to it. Was important. "Let's begin there, then. I'll light the fire and prepare dinner." And that was all. No judgment, no laughter. Someone saw for the first time in years neither the girl beneath the sack nor the rejected or unwelcome niece bride, but a lady with hands capable of provide warmth in a chilly environment. Beyond the over-the-mountains, the wind raged. However, when we first entered the cabin, something stirred in Mara that she hadn't dared to feel for a while. I hope. That night the snow fell heavily. It howled through the gaps in the window frame and pounded against the cabin roof like handfuls of rock. With the orange glow creating shadows on the rough-hewn walls, Elias had placed another log to the stove. Using a little knife Dad had given her earlier, Mara sat quietly by the table and peeled potatoes. For a time, neither of them talked. The only noises were the fire's pop and the blade's gentle scrape across the potato skins. Whereas Mara walked with the caution of someone who was scared to break it, Elias moved with the ease of a man accustomed to silence. The aroma filled the cabin as the stew finally simmered. Salt, carrots, onions, and a toasty scent she hadn't detected in months. At home, she chewed her lip as she stirred the kettle. She reasoned that even though he had purchased me, he had made no demands. Edlis approached her silently and stood next to her. He gave the pot a quick glance and gave one nod. His voice was low as he remarked, "Smells like something a man could live for." Mara gave a small smile, or simply something to sustain him. He grunted softly, possibly in amusement. She saw that he briefly lowered his head before raising his spoon when they sat down to eat. Whispering a prayer she hadn't uttered since her mother's death, she followed. Though it wasn't a heavy meal, they ate in silence. It was the rough, warm, and in some ways secure sort that felt like a quilt. Following supper, Elias got up and approached the door, slightly opening it. His coat clattered in the wind. "Storm's building worse than I thought," he stated. "You'll be snowed in a few days, maybe a week." Softly, "You'll be too," Mara said. The corners of his mouth quirked up as he turned to face her again. "We'll just have to make the most of it, I suppose." He moved his blanket to the far corner next to the door and made her a bed by the fire that evening. "I'll go to sleep," he informed her. "Do not hesitate to wake me if you hear anything, including wolves or the wind." Mara, however, did not hear wolves. Across the room, she could hear Elias breathing in a slow, steady pattern, which in some way helped her feel less alone. The planet was covered in white the following morning due to the storm. Elias used his shoulder to pry open the frozen door, allowing a rush of chilly air to fill the cottage. Mara let out a gasp. The environment was quiet and infinite. The trees were laden with snow, and their branches were hunched low. He brushed ice from his beard and asked, "Have you ever seen snow like this?" "Not like this," she said in a whisper. "It never lasted long back home." "It seems to own the earth here," he said, nodding. "It does. The mountain is not something you fight. You come to terms with it." She silently observed as he purposefully navigated the morning. After checking the traps close to the tree and splitting wood, He returned carrying a rabbit and a little bag of cornmeal. Everything he accomplished was done with care. Even though his hands were harsh and his voice was few, Mara scrubbed the table and made bread with the tiny flour she discovered in his tin while he was at work. She murmured gently, a song her mother used to sing when baking, even though the dough adhered to her fingers. The aroma of baked bread greeted Elias at the entrance when he returned inside. Startled, he paused. "You baked?" She gave a sly smirk. "I hope it's okay with you." I felt that something new would be pleasant. He removed his gloves, approached, and peered at the little loaf that was cooling on the board. "Mind?" His tone grew softer. "Feels like a blessing." More persistent than the aroma of bread was the word benediction. Their life's pattern became more consistent as the days went by. Mara maintained the fire, fixed things, and prepared meals. Elias hunted, cut wood, and informed her about mountain life, including how the river thawed every spring, how storms may change suddenly, and how quiet could be either an ally or an enemy. One evening, while sitting by the fire with a cup of coffee in his hands, he mentioned that he occasionally talked about his 6-year-old son. Micah, his mother passed away 2 winters ago. She got a fever quickly. He then fell silent for a considerable amount of time. Mara's heart ached as she gazed at the flaming flames. Does he resemble her? Elias gave a small smile. Too much. I see her again every time he chuckles. Makes it challenging but worthwhile. Then there was quiet, cozy and considerate. Mara paused before stating, "You know, he's lucky to have a father who still finds the positive side of things." Elias raised his head, his eyes calm. "How about you? Do you think your tale still has merit, Mara?" She took a deep breath. "I don't know. Like light passing through clouds, the good seems to come and go." He gave a contemplative nod. It might still be there. Perhaps it's merely concealment. The storm subsided by the 5th day. The frozen world became a sea of glass as the sun's light faded across the snowfields. To see how Micah was doing, Elias hitched his horse and prepared to journey into town. He informed her, "I'll be back by nightfall. If you need anything, there is flour, tea, and jerky available." Despite feeling tight in her chest, she nodded and said, "Keep the fire high." It was odd how fast she had adapted to his steady hands, his quiet voice, and his presence. He stopped at the door and observed her for a while. "Mara, you did well here," he replied quietly. "You made this place feel alive again." He left before she could respond, his horse's hooves crunching into the snow until there was nothing left except quiet. While cleaning the cabin, Mara continued to hum, albeit with a trembling melody. On the shelf, she discovered an antique book with soft pages and a weathered cover. As she read till the light went out, she noticed a little, delicate yellow blossom that had been squeezed between the pages. That night, her heart thumping, she leaped to her feet as she heard them. The door opened. Elias entered, a young lad clutching his coat as snow dusted his shoulders. Elias whispered, "This is Micah." The youngster, weak and pallid with tired eyes, peeked out from behind his father. With a soft grin, Mara knelt down softly. "Hi there, Micah. My name is Mara." After a little silence, the boy made a tiny, silent sign of trust by reaching out and touching her hand. Elias, too. His eyes gleamed with something more profound than relief as he simply stood there and watched them. Because his house had more than just walls and warmth for the first time in a long time. It was full of unspoken laughter, and it had been brought there by the woman who had entered his life with a sack on her head. By the 3rd week, the mountain had started to thaw. The river beneath Elias's cabin had begun to murmur once more, informing the ground that spring was approaching, and the ice on the eaves dripped in a steady cadence. For Mara, each morning had become a quiet, peaceful ritual that started with the fire, followed by food and small task assistance for Micah. Despite his infrequent speech, the kid had begun to following her like a shadow. He would tug on her sleeve, point at objects, and occasionally smile when he thought she wasn't looking. Elias took note. He leaned against the doorframe one morning while she demonstrated the dough-kneading technique to Micah. uneven forms were left behind by the child's little hands pressing into the blossom. With a giggle as gentle as the breeze through pine needles, Mara led him forward. She said, "Not too hard, sweetheart. Let it breathe." Micah glanced at Elias after looking up at her. There was a brief change in his expression, a query or perhaps the beginning of trust. Mara turned to see Elias staring at her with unfathomable eyes. She brushed her floral hair and said, "What?" Hands on her apron. He gave a headshake. "Just a little. A lot of time has passed since in this house I've heard laughter, Mara." Her eyes fell, but she gave a slight smile. "Perhaps your house was simply waiting for someone to recall how." Elias didn't respond immediately. He walked across the room, touched Micah's shoulder and uttered, with a whisper, "Maybe you're right." The paths reopened after the snow melted. Elias started visiting the town once every week for supplies, and Mara occasionally accompanied him. She felt every eye like a stone against her skin when she returned to society for the first time since being sold. They were followed by whispers from the blacksmith's shed, the porch of the local store, and even the women collecting water at the pump. Someone whispered, "That's the bride with the sack." "The mountainman's purchase," chuckled his companion. Mara kept her chin up, but inside something twisted. Elias noticed again. He paused before mounting, saying, when they returned to the wagon, "You hold your head higher than most, Mara," observed the man. She forced a smile as she shrugged. "They win if I allow them to watch me break." Elias nodded briefly, his rugged exterior betraying adoration. "Compared to most men I know, you have more grit." They returned in silence, but the ride was cozy and didn't require much filling. Outside the chalet, the first wild flowers emerged a week later as the snow melted. Micah brought her one, a silky, delicate blue lupine. She placed it behind her ear after he silently gave it to her. "Micah, thank you," she muttered. "It's beautiful." Elias, who was observing from the porch, gave a quick but tiny smile. He was looking at her differently now for some reason. Not sympathy, not interest, but something more subdued and profound. Elias spoke as he sharpened his knife beside the fire that night, while the sky over the ridge flared orange and gold. "I used to think beauty was a curse out here," replied the man. "It makes a man reckless and attracts trouble." He hesitated, though, when the blade caught the light. "I believe I was mistaken." The steward turned away from Mara. "Why did you decide against it?" Slowly, he raised his head to meet her eyes. "You?" The word was hefty, but soothing as it hung there. Mara stopped. She was at a loss for words. She wasn't certain what she could say. She was not pressed by Elias. His gaze lingered on her for a minute longer than usual before he returned to sharpening the knife. Her heart thumping, she lay awake that night gazing at the rafters. She reasoned that he couldn't mean it, not me. She could still see the expression on his face when she closed her eyes, though, which was one of silent recognition rather than hunger or need. It seemed as though he was seeing her for the first time. A sudden burst of life, melted creeks, blossoming meadows, and the scent of wet pine accompanied the full arrival of spring. Elias had started teaching Micah how to fish, and Mara frequently brought bread and dried fruit on their outings. She would hear laughs before she ever saw them when they got back. Micah's voice was free and light as he said, "Mama, look." She stopped in her tracks when he spoke it for the first time. Elias's eyes darted to her face, looking equally shocked. Micah was completely unaware of what he had said. He simply smiled and held up a fish. "Mama, I caught it myself." Mara's eyes became hazy. He slammed right into her as she fell to her knees with her arms out. She muttered, "Oh, Micah," and held him close. "You did so good." Elias stood there, his eyes softening as he gazed at them, his face once again unreadable. He said, "It seems like I have two things to thank God for right now." The cabin erupted in laughter once more that evening. Mara performed a gentle song from her early years for the first time. As Micah clapped along, Elias leaned against the doorframe and listened silently. G was happy to listen, feeling as though the world had momentarily stopped turning. Elias joined the group for a trip to town a few days later. He said, "You'll come this time too. Misha asking for a ribbon for your hair." Despite her hot cheeks, Mara chuckled. "He has he?" "He says blue suits you." Elias said in response. He has good taste, in my opinion. People gazed once more when they arrived in town. However, something had changed. Mara didn't look down this time. She was serene, steady, and dazzling in her simplicity as she strolled next to Elias. Mrs. Leland, who had previously informed her that she would never be selected, was passed by them. The elderly woman stopped in the middle of her stride, her eyes wide as she took in the scene, Elias's hand resting softly on her back as they made their way through the crowd, Mara holding her head high. Later that afternoon, a little girl approached Mara outside the store as Elias was loading groceries. "Ma'am," she said shrilly, "Mima says you're the woman who made the mountain man smile again." Startled, Mara blinked. Then she gave a quiet smile. "Maybe the mountain just needed a little warmth," she added. Elias heard. His voice was low as he climbed into the wagon next to her. "She's right, you know. It had been years since I had smiled like this." As the sun caught the gold in his beard, Mara turned to face him and looked him in the eye. She whispered, "Elias, you're a good man. All you had to do was keep it in mind." With a single nod, he raised the corner of his mouth. "And you needed someone to notice what was already there, Mara." For a while, neither talked as the wind picked up, bringing with it the smell of soil and pine. There were only two souls, stable as the surrounding mountain, subtly starting to belong, no vows, declarations, or commitments etched in stone. The valley became a patchwork of gold and green in the ensuing weeks. The streams flowed forcefully once again after the thaw had finally shattered. Every morning, sunshine streamed through the cabin's window like a gift, and birds returned to the trees. Life had found a rhythm that was peaceful, straightforward, and even kind. Elias would get up early to either ride out and inspect his herd or cut wood. Soon after, Mara would get up, make coffee, and murmur quietly while she prepared food, "I'll be back before nightfall." But Mara frowned. "You said that last time, and you came home after midnight, bleeding from your arm." She noticed the glimmer of fatigue behind his eyes as he attempted to grin. "You're worrying too much," he whispered. Her tone was steady but gentle as she crossed her arms. "Someone must." After pausing, Elias chuckled softly. "You seem to have fit in here all along." "I'm beginning to believe that I do," she added. She received an unreadable glance for it. Something more profound, weightier, as if he wanted to say more but was unsure how. The fog engulfed him as he rode off along the trail. The day was lengthy and lonesome. Mara kept herself occupied by sweeping the porch, washing the linens, and assisting Micah in gathering wildflowers by the creek. However, a chilly uneasiness started to develop within of her as the sun started to set behind the peaks, and Elias had still not come back. She eventually caught sight of a form moving through the trees as the first stars came out. With his jersey ripped at the shoulder, Elias stumbled forward as he rode in. Mara rushed over to him. "It's nothing," Elias murmured, despite the blood on his sleeve indicating otherwise. When he attempted to get off, his legs gave way. She stabilized him by catching his arm. She cleansed his wound inside the cottage by the firelight, a lengthy, furious gash that is shallow. She inquired, "What happened?" She wiped the towel on his skin and he winced. "Coyote trap." The elderly one missed it. She muttered to herself as she shook her head. "You're fortunate that it wasn't worse." He gave a small smile. "Isn't that the reason you're here? To protect me from my own stupidity?" Her hands went cold. "The fire broke out." She remained silent for a while before speaking gently. "Perhaps, or perhaps it was you who saved me." Elias raised his head and gave her a serious look. Her face, her gentle features, and her weary but steady eyes were all illuminated by the lamplight. "I didn't save you, Mara," he revealed. "I just gave you a home." Her voice faltered. "That's more than anyone ever gave me." Hawks flying low above the woods, deer in the meadows, and laughing coming from the cabin porch. One evening, Mara watched Micah chase fireflies while standing outside with flower-streaked hands. With the fading yellow of the sky behind him, Elias emerged next to her. He whispered, "She's happier," and nodded to his son. "So are you," was her response. He laughed. "It's been a while since I've heard that." Mara turned to face him. Perhaps someone had to remind you. After examining her for a while, he spoke slowly, as though considering every word. I had believed that the mountain would be my lone friend until the end of time. Calm, icy, and dependable. But then you arrived. Her heart gave a little lurch, and it feels like home now. Neither of them moved for a heartbeat. Her hair was softly tugged by the breeze. Elias inhaled deeply. "Mara," he remarked in a quiet, confident tone, "you've added more warmth to this space than I had anticipated." Her eyes were sparkling. Elias said, "I was never looking for much, just a location where I could fit in." Rough palm against soft fingers, he grabbed her hand and held it firmly. "Then stay," was all he said. "You already do, so stay." After a few weeks, the conversation in town started to shift. The mountain man and his peculiar bride continued to be discussed in whispers. However, their conversation changed when Elias rode down with Mara at his side. Their voices were one of quiet interest, even appreciation rather than derision. She had tamed him, they said. Others said that she had cured him. However, a deeper examination revealed something more straightforward. Despite all the odds, two individuals had discovered a form of unasked-for tranquility. One afternoon at the market, they were spotted by Mrs. Hattie Crowell, the matchmaker who had previously mocked Mara's lot in life. Mara assisted Micah in selecting apples as Elias loaded flour sacks. Hattie observed him perform a small, thoughtless act of kindness by brushing a stray curl from Mara's face. Mara only grinned when their gazes locked. "Afternoon, Mrs. Crale," she said softly. The elderly woman blinked, confused. "It looks good on you, Mrs. Wren." Mara's head cocked. "Yes, I am," Hattie muttered to herself as they turned to go. "Perhaps some tales do have a happy ending." Elias listened to the crickets sing while sitting near the porch that evening. Wrapping a blanket across his shoulders, Mara joined him. "Do you ever feel bad about it?" she inquired quietly. "Buying a woman with a sack on her head?" He grinned slowly and seemed a little disappointed that I hadn't removed the sack earlier. Mara chuckled softly before becoming reflective. "Didn't you actually freeze that day?" He gave a nod, unable to move. I realized something, not because I was surprised. She gave him a waiting gaze. "Up here I'd been building walls for years," he added. "I believed I wanted to be alone. But after seeing your face, I realized I had actually been alone, rather than free." Her throat constricted. With hardly a whisper in her voice, she took his hand. "And now," he continued, stroking her knuckles with his thumb. "I don't see a cage. I spot a house." Mara lay awake next to him later that night, listening to the soft cadence of his breathing as the moon rose silver over the peaks. With the house enveloped in tranquilly, Micah slept in the adjacent room. She closed her eyes and reflected on the day she was sold, the bag that kept her hidden from the outside world, the shame and the laughing. She then remembered the man who had viewed her as a beginning rather than a burden, the mountain wind and the warmth of the fire. Knowing that she would never have to cover her face again, Mara Lawn smiled in the dark for the first time in her life. Because of someone, a man who is as resilient and damaged as the actual mountains, had glanced once and kept looking. Thus, a woman who had been concealed under a sack discovered a love that was resilient enough to withstand any adversity. It was demonstrated by Mara and Elias that sometimes the most tender hearts emerge from the most trying circumstances. If you were moved by this tale, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It makes these Wild West stories of bravery and love more widely known. If you were in Elias Ice's place that day, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments.